I'm Justin Glaw, writer and journalist, and I've spent my career chronicling the violence, unrest, and chaos of American life. On this podcast, I'll discuss the events roiling this complex and troubling country and speak with some of the people trying to make sense of the madness that pervades our world. This is American Doom. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the American Doom podcast. Today, I am talking with Tim Mak, who is a journalist in Ukraine who writes the counteroffensive newsletter on Substack. And today, Tim and I are going to be talking about Donald Trump's presidency's effect on the war in Ukraine, as well as the effect of shuttering USAID on humanitarian aid options there. Just a reminder, you can check out my Substack at american-doom.com and support us with a paid subscription. Thanks. Hey, Tim, thanks so much for joining me today. There's a lot going on. And because it's a Trump administration, there's more going on, even from the time when we set this up like 72 hours ago and said we need to talk about some things. So, let's just get right into it. Trump and Putin are clearly discussing Ukraine, and I can't help but wonder if this is going to go as badly for the Ukrainians as apparently it just did for the Palestinians with Trump's discussions with Netanyahu. Can you tell me, a little bit of kind of what your thoughts are on these new revelations that Trump and Putin are apparently discussing what their end game is here for the struggles over there?
Well, it's a real nightmare from the Ukrainian perspective, which is that the United States, which has been until now its greatest ally in its resistance against the Russian invasion, that the United States might go around them and make a deal without them, without their input, and establish a peace that mortgages Ukraine's future for a small kind of diplomatic win for Trump in the present. That is the nightmare scenario. And, we're in a situation in the war now where we're nearly 3 years into it, and Ukraine is running critically low in its most vital resource, which is manpower. That so many people have been killed and injured as a result of this terrible war, that it is now very much struggling to man the front lines and make sure that there are enough soldiers fighting on the battlefield. It's become a real struggle, and at the same time, the folks who should be its closest friends and allies, the United States, are off having secret conversations with their sworn enemies. So it's a cause for real deep concern.
Right. And I mean, I think the concern is exacerbated by the fact that of the two people that Trump could have met with, he met with Putin first instead of Zelensky, right? I mean, is that adding to the concern and the heartburn that Ukrainians probably have right now about all of these apparently ongoing negotiations?
It's fundamentally just that they don't have visibility into what those conversations are, right? That they're not at a table. All the parties that are part of the war are not at the table together. There are some side conversations that exclude them from being a part of those negotiations and having a say as to what their future is. They're being treated like some sort of vassal state rather than a partner or a collaborator, or the people who have been fighting to stem the tide of Russian violence in Europe. They're not getting credit for that. What they're being treated like is sort of a secondary almost nuisance that isn't allowed at the big boys table.
Right. And they're also sort of being treated like they're really no different than the other party here, right? Like, oh, they're just involved in this fight as if they weren't the victim in this and not the aggressor. I also want to touch on the mineral rights stuff because I can't imagine that is really making Ukrainians feel really good about the Trump administration and its plans for negotiating, a quote unquote end to this war. Can you tell me a little bit about like what people think of all of this? Because this is very clearly Trump trying to make good on saying, well, I'm going to get more out of our involvement, whether it's NATO or, whatever it is. And so now we've got Zelensky basically saying, okay, well, we'll give you some mineral rights. Like, is that an actual thing, or is that just Zelensky sort of giving a fig leaf so that Trump can claim he got a little win there? And either way, I can't imagine Ukrainians like this very much, right?
Look, Justin, like you and I want American foreign policy to be based on what America stands for, its values, how, a mature 21st century um, foreign policy that's based on what we think the world ought to look like and how it's stronger based on our partnerships with other countries. Um, but in a strange way, the Ukrainians that I've spoken to in government and the Ukrainians that are kind of influential in Kyiv aren't as vexed about the Trump administration as I would expect. What they
Mm,
see is a Trump administration where that wants to be transactional, and they kind of look at this and they say, okay, we're desperate. We need to win the war at all costs. This is an existential threat to us. If we need to be
yeah.
transactional, then we'll be transactional. It's kind of like I talked to we do some coverage of Taiwan as well at the counteroffensive, and the Taiwanese are eager to be transactional with the Trump administration because it kind of
Mm,
cements a deal, an exchange of we give you this and you give us protection, and it kind of
right.
binds the parties together in a way that merely ambiguously saying we're gonna defend democratic values maybe isn't as satisfying for them or as reassuring to them. And so for Ukraine, I've talked to a lot of people who are like, if we need to give up our critical minerals for a chance at not being threatened at all times by this Russian monster next door, we're willing to give up. We're willing to give that up. As an American, I don't like foreign policy being conducted that way. But Ukrainians, they see it in a totally different from a totally different perspective, which is we have already lost so many lives. You're just asking for some minerals. We're happy to make that trade. It's one of the few things we have to trade right now, and so we're willing to do it. And so it's been surprising to me about how willing and interested Ukraine has been to step up to this negotiation in a transactional manner.
Right. Yeah. And I totally get that mindset. I mean, look, you're so beaten down. You're like, sure, whatever. You want some minerals to give us some aid here so that we can get back on the front lines and continue this fight? Fine, whatever. Have them. I would wonder if I were Ukrainian, when is the other shoe going to drop here? The Trump administration is asking for aid, or they're asking Taiwan for whatever they want from Taiwan, and in exchange for this, there's no guarantee that that is ever going to happen. I mean, Trump isn't exactly known as a guy who abides by his contracts that he signs, So I get totally where they're coming from on that. I guess I just wonder if there's any level of concern that they have that, like, we're not going to hold up our end of the bargain if that transaction is made.
There's already a tremendous amount of cynicism and suspicion, and not only obviously between the Ukrainians and Russians, but between Ukrainians and their partners. They feel like they have borne the brunt of a Russian attack on Europe. They feel that they've been promised a lot of things in terms of military aid, which has not come to fruition. They feel like they have not gotten enough credit for the role that they played in defending democratic nations. They feel like they've paid ultimate costs but not gotten ultimate support from its partners, many of
Mm,
whom are starting to just get fatigued by the fact that there's a war over here, which is outrageous to them. And so, even among friends, even among the closest friends like Ukraine and Poland, or Ukraine and in the past the United States, there's a lot of suspicion, and Ukraine just simply does not understand the perspective of other countries who go on living their lives as if there isn't an ongoing war here in Ukraine where people are dying every day.
And that's a totally understandable question for them to have, I would think. And I wonder, and this brings me to why I wanted to talk with you in the first place, which is the whole USAID debacle. And I sort of, as soon as I saw this, and as soon as I read the Project 2025 section on USAID, and I saw the mention of Ukraine, I couldn't help but wonder whether or not this was an easy way for the Trump administration to quickly and very efficiently cut off some level of funding for Ukraine, right? Because a lot of money, not money that's going to bombs and guns and soldiers, but a lot of money to for the fight in Ukraine was coming from USAID. I wonder if what you make of that, and I wonder if that is potentially a sign of worse things to come, unfortunately, for the Ukrainians in terms of the U.S. commitment to the war effort there.
Yeah, I mean the fact is that that USAID has been an enormously positive force in Ukrainian society. The thing that Republicans and Trump have complained about so much for so long, often exaggerating these problems with corruption in Ukrainian society. USAID has been among the most important parts of bringing Ukraine out of its post-Soviet mindset into a European and democratic mindset, bringing its government institutions, its business dealings into the 21st century. Um, what's
Mm,
happening now has been an enormous blow to civil society. A lot of it, a lot of it, which is already struggling because of the war, um, and is exacerbating things like services for veterans, healthcare services for folks who are dealing with PTSD. We're talking about things like fighting corruption at an institutional level, local and independent news media near the front lines. These are the sorts of things that Ukrainians will now have to do without because of this sort of um, arbitrary and complete dismantling of the American foreign aid apparatus overnight and with no warning. It's been a real blow to pretty much everyone working for democracy and against corruption uh, at the kind of local Ukrainian level. A lot of different organizations depended on this for their
yeah.
operations.
Including something I read, which is like, okay, we think maybe USAID, the Republican line here, the line from the American right is like, oh, it's all these frivolous programs that aren't really. I mean, USAID money was going to fund sort of refugee centers near the front lines in Ukraine, like places where people could go and get out of harm's way and stay warm. Like that's one of the places that USAID money was going to. So this wasn't, sort of the fever dream of the right. The sort of culture war stuff that the DEI, all of this stuff that they were focused on. Like some of this money was
Yeah.
going to very important war effort things. Um, so
Urgent, imminent humanitarian aid that saves lives. I mean, in 2023, that's the last year for which there are full figures available. Um, about a quarter of USAID funding was spent in Ukraine, and this is in some cases really life saving humanitarian aid.
and now it's gone. And I think that unfortunately could be a sign of future worse things to come in terms of our commitment to helping out Ukraine. Where can people go to read your work, and what can they do if they want to get involved in not just keeping up with what's going on in Ukraine, but potentially helping out with efforts there?
Well, for me personally, I left the United States and moved to Kiev because I really wanted to make sure that people did not fall prey to this kind of Ukraine fatigue or forget what is happening here as this war continues to claim lives in a totally unjustified and illegal invasion by Russia. So what we did was we launched something called the Counteroffensive, which you can read at counteroffensive.news. And we do human interest stories. So we go deep into the life of someone who it has experienced something important in the news that gives some context to the war and Ukrainian history and culture. And we use that as a way to tell what's going on in the news. There are many, many different ways to contribute to helping what comes next in the Ukraine war. But I think the first and foremost and kind of most important one is not to give into the cynicism and lack of empathy that I think we all feel from time to time a little tempted to do, given all the terrible things that are happening around us. There is a inclination, I know you all hear it, to maybe just tune out. And we don't have that luxury right now. We have to open our eyes, pay attention, and keep those people who are doing wrong accountable. And whether that's the Trump administration and their actions or other people around the world that are trying to repress folks simply wanting to live a free life. We need to pay attention to that, and we need to continue reading and watching and pressing for justice.
Well, Tim, you're doing great work over there, and we're very appreciative of it. And stay safe, keep up the good work, and we'll see you again next time.
Thanks so much, Justin.
Thank you for listening to American Doom. This podcast is just a part of my work as a writer and journalist. To keep up, or at least to try to, because chaos and speed are the two primary drivers of my work, you can subscribe to my newsletter on Substack. Just search for American Doom there, and you'll find the investigations and stories that I cover. Coming up on my newsletter are more dives into election deniers working as local election officials across the country. This is work I've been doing mostly by myself for the last 4 years, and it's not possible without your support. American Doom is the only place that you'll find reporting on local election denier officials. So if you support this effort to protect against threats to democracy, please subscribe to my newsletter, American Doom, on Substack. Thank you.